talk about some basic guitar setup stuff that you don't need to be a luthier to understand. Like, sometimes a guitar just feels wrong. Like, you pick it up and you're like, dude, what the f***, my guy, what's going on here? And really, there's three things that usually is: neck relief, action, and intonation. This video is sponsored by TrueFire.com, the largest online library of interactive music lessons with over 87,000 lessons taught by legendary players and folks like me. TrueFire is where I put all my deep dives into the cage thing, double stops, fingerstyle, and more. I make several courses a year. But here's a cool thing about TrueFire. If you can't decide on what course you might want to download, you can sign up for 1 year of all access. That lets you stream any of their 1,500 plus courses, and you still get access to features like on-screen tabs, backing tracks to play along with, and an extra 25% off downloads. Personally, I like to use it as an interview library because they have so many legends on there. Want to spend an afternoon with G.E. Smith, Jimmy Vivino, Jim Campolongo? They're all there. Check the description box below for the link to get 1 year of all access. I hope to see you there. There's a few tools you'll need to follow along with this video. I keep all my tools in a little box like this, and so amongst, well, many other things that are in this little guitar box, here's what we need: a capo, Allen wrenches, standard and metric, screwdrivers, big and small, and a string action gauge. That's the one thing you probably don't have. I do think those are worth it. Neck relief is the amount of curvature of the neck once it's under tension from the strings. Now you need, a certain amount of distance from the frets so they don't, the strings don't just smack against the fretboard and buzz and thwack. But if there's too much relief, and I notice specifically from like the 5th fret to the 12th fret, it'll feel like spongy almost, and like you might get tangled under the wire if you go for a bend. Now this is subjective, but let's grab a different guitar and I'll show you what I mean. Because this guitar, honestly, the setup is perfect right now, so I don't want to mess with it. This Retro Sound 61 Special, great guitar. Let's get my Squier out so I can illustrate this further. Here's how I check for relief if something feels weird to me. First, I do a very inexact sight check down the side of the fretboard. Don't bother trying to look at the board dead on. There's too much visual information there. If you focus on the side, sometimes you can see a bow. Now, if you see a bow and it doesn't bother you, congratulations, you're a bass player. Now, there is a slightly more exact method. Tune the guitar up and place a capo at the 1st fret. Then press down the string at the last fret. You are now using the string as your straight edge. There should be some, and I mean the tiniest bit of play at around the 8th fret. If there isn't, that means you have like no relief, and you probably have a lot of fret buzz, string noise, and thwack and noise. If it's a really big gap, that means you have too much of a bow. Luthiers use feeler gauges to measure this, and sure, if you're feeling spendy, you can get a set of those. The best I can say is I like to make sure there is some, and I mean some, play at around the 8th fret. I don't know, maybe a 0.5 millimeter. It's really, I don't know. It's like, as long as it's there, but not giant, I'm like, okay, that's probably good. So if we've determined we have too much or too little action or play or relief at that 8th fret, then yes, it's time to adjust the truss rod, which is the big screw that runs down the entire length of the fretboard. Very important that you never turn it more than like a quarter turn at a time, and I'll show you in a minute. Basically, righty tighty, lefty loosey. Tighty is going to reduce that bow and bring the strings closer to the fretboard. Loosening it up, well, that's going to increase the relief and raise it. So if your guitar is thwacky and the strings are really sitting too close on the fretboard, well, then you're going to loosen it a little bit to kind of create a little bit of gap. And it really varies depending on the season and depending on what you feel. Again, for me, it's like what it feels like, again, in that 5th to 12th area, like if it feels, I don't know, I can't explain it. If it feels right to me or if it feels spongy and clumsy. Let's abuse my Squier Starcaster so you can see what I'm talking about. This guitar has a fret issue that we're going to talk about later, so I don't mind ruining the setup. First, let's loosen it to really increase the bow. By the way, if you're a heavy hitter, you're going to want more action and more relief than medium gentle boys like me. Notice that I loosen the D and the G string to get them out of the way so I can get easier access to turn the truss rod. And now let's tighten it to bring that back down to roughly where I like it to be. Once I get the neck relief about where I like it, the next thing I do is, check the action. This is where I do recommend spending some money at StewMac and getting their string action gauge. They have a standard or metric one. I use the metric because it just makes more sense to me to think of things in millimeters than it does fractions of an inch, but whatever you're comfortable with. I tend to like to have about 1.25 to 1.5 millimeters under my high E string, my skinny E, and 1.5 to 1.75 under my low E. It is simpler to adjust action on guitars like Gibsons and Gretsch's, where, or honestly the Squire's set up the same way, where it's just a screw here and a screw there that raises up each side independently. On Strats and Tellys, where it's an individual adjustment for each string, that's trickier, and I don't like to mess around with that as much. Well, let me go get a Strat. I'll show you what I mean. This is my Carl Longbottom custom hollow Strat with Lawler gold foil, super cool. But anyway, because we have individual, I'll get a closer shot of this. We have individual action adjustments for each string and two of them. So you can really get yourself in trouble tweaking this a lot because you run into the risk of the string height no longer matches the radius of the fretboard. And there's a gadget for everything. There are StewMac sells radius gauges that you can stick and kind of set the strings to that. I never bothered really using those. I usually, just use, where'd it go? My action gauge to kind of make sure that things are about where I like them to be. The other thing I do have to say about Strats that makes them a little bit trickier to tweak the action is, so there's two individual points to adjust the action on each saddle, and the entire apparatus is mounted on springs, which does affect the action as well as you loosen or tighten the springs. So it's like you can get really lost with a Strat, so I don't really recommend going crazy with that. Like sometimes something's just a little high and you can kind of nudge it. And just so you know how I like to set my trems up, I use only 3 springs. And I have it's not floating, but if I bend a string, I'll get a closer shot of this. If I bend a string, it does lift up. So it's not like all the way tightened down, but it's also not, Jeff Beck floating above the body. I don't know. I just don't I don't like it that way. That's my taste. Sometimes these screws or thumb wheels don't really want to move depending on your guitar. Sometimes they move easy, sometimes they don't. So sometimes you have to loosen the strings, down, well below pitch, do an adjustment, retune and check. There's a lot of that with setting up your guitar where you have to loosen something, make an adjustment, and tighten it back up and check again. So intonation is something you won't really feel, but you will hear it. And what that is, can you see this? Is the exactness of the string length from where it starts this way to over here. And you have those very small adjustment points on your guitar to make sure that when you push down this 5th fret here, it really becomes an A. And that's why if you look down at your guitar, they're all a little bit different. If the note is not what it's supposed to be, if it's too low, that means the string is too long. Think about a bass. A bass is a longer instrument. It makes lower sounds. So if the note is lower than it's supposed to be, that means we need to make the string shorter. Now, if the note is higher than it was supposed to be, well, then that means the distance is too short. Well, we need to make the string the tiniest bit longer. Let's check the intonation on this guitar. Okay. Ideally, you would do this with new strings. Again, we're determining whether or not all these tones down the fretboard are what they should be. We got our polytune going down here. Let's check like the G string. Okay, he's good in the open. What about at the 5th fret? Yep, he's settling about right. What about at the 7th? Let's go up to 10. So again, okay, let's just make sure he's settling about there. Yeah, if you notice, notes always are first sharp and then they settle down. I'm going to go ahead and say that's okay because once you have vibrato, that's all right. Let's check like one more string that tends to be a problem string. The high E can be a problem. What about at the 7th? And let's go up to 12. Yeah, that seems about right. Other times I've had problems with the D string, so let's check him. What about at the 7th? What about the 12th? Yeah, he's all right. So the string length is good on the Squire today, but it does change. It does change. And there are times shooting a video, I will have to stop and do a quick adjustment because I'll hear sometimes like a power chord up here. I might notice that. It's a guided by voices one half. There's a couple of other special issues with intonation that you can discover as you go up and down the fretboard. One being, if all your frets are showing up where they should be, except one is radically higher than it should, that means that the fret isn't seated properly. And that's something that, like, I don't do that. I don't do fret work. That's when it's got to go to the doctor. The other important one, and this one has had work done down here, is when your intonation is good all here, but like crazy sharp at the 1st fret. Uh-oh, I'm scared to find out if I am. Like the B string is often a real problem. Oh, fingers crossed this is a proper C. Oh, because yes, sometimes, especially on cheap guitars, that's an indication that this is not cut right, that your nut is not cut right. Go ahead and put in whatever jokes about nuts you want to put in. It's all engagement for me, so thank you very much. Let's check the nut on the G string. So there's my G in tune is the 2nd fret and A. Okay, good. Because that, again, on cheaper guitars, this is where they don't spend a lot of time filing that out. Fret sprout, and this is happening right now to this guitar and my Telecaster. In the winter, it's dry, it's cold, and even with a humidifier in my guitar room, some of the necks are shrinking at a greater rate than the frets are shrinking, and so what you get is a very uncomfortable pointy, 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 pointy down the entire fretboard. Now, I'm going to hold off on dealing with the Telecaster until I'm sure that the humidity is, again, I have a humidity gauge in my guitar room. 40 to 60% is what guitars like. It's also what we like. This guy has an extra problem, which is a real bummer. It has fret sprout, which the Rickenbacker 330 I borrowed last year, that had it too. So they're sticking out that way. This one also has, I'll get a close-up of this, the edges of the frets aren't seated all the way down. They've all popped up to the extent where like you can actually get a post-it note under the edges of all of the frets, which kind of sucks for this guitar because it's a great $400 guitar. I would totally recommend it. If not for that, I'm a little bit like, well, it's not worth it to get it refretted or a new neck. I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. I'm gonna wait a little while, see if the humidity helps out, and I guess I'll take it to my boys at Twin House Music and see if they can just bash the edges of the frets back in. But I feel like something's wrong. Like they didn't. Again, cheap guitar, you get what you pay for. And which is funny because I know I've made videos about, oh, Squire stuff, it's totally fine. Well, it is and it isn't. a lot of Fenders, the truss rod adjustment isn't up here. It's over here, and yeah, it's kind of annoying. You gotta take the neck off to do those little truss rod turns. Here's what I do. I loosen the strings a little bit, then I put a capo down at the first fret and loosen them a lot more, and usually that means that they stay on while I take the neck plate off, as gingerly as I can, pop the neck out, and again, give it a quarter a turn, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, and then, as nicely as I can, put it back together. Yeah, it doesn't take that long, but it never feels great to be like, all right, well, let me just take the guitar apart and put it back together. But that's vintage style. One thing we didn't talk about yet is pickup height. That's not something I get too persnickety about. Generally, I don't like my pickups to be too close to the strings. I don't need that like honking, more output, like more. I'm like, well, whatever, seems reasonable and even between the two of them, depending on the pickup is fine. So I don't know. Some people get real specific about their pickup heights and like, oh, I need it to be, this at this one and that at that one. I don't think I've adjusted pickups in the last 10 years. So I don't have information about that for you. Another handy thing to have around is deoxit. From time to time, your switch might get dusty or not even work. And sometimes, just one spray of that will help out. So this is definitely something that you want to keep around. Let's talk a little bit about string gauges. On most of my guitars, I think I have 10s. This one has 11s on it, Ernie Ball 11s. I'm not really persnickety about strings. I'm like, those are fine. Diodario's fine. String joys, whatever you like is fine. I have 11s on this one, my Telecaster, and my Mustang. Guitars that I want to bend a little bit more, I put 10s on. The Gibson style guitars, those retro sound, the 59 Burst and the 61 Special, those have 10s on them. I will say this, and this is important. Sometimes people put on, and this happened to me, I was trying to make this, into a cooter caster, and I put 11s on. They didn't fit in the nut slots, and so they're sitting above it. 11 flat wounds, I should specify. 11 flat wounds are thicker than 11 round wounds. But anyway, they didn't fit, which you could imagine what that did to my intonation if they don't fit there. So I actually went back down to 11 round wounds instead of filing out the nut slots more. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. It costs you nothing. Helps me out a lot when people do that. One more time, how my business works. Patreon is where there's every backing track I've ever made, live Q&A seminars, and more. I update that every week, and I also make courses like you saw me talk about earlier with the folks at True Fire. As Bill and Ted would say, be excellent to each other. That includes yourself. See you next week.